Okay, so welcome back to the Pilipinx-American Stories Podcast. I am your host, Alfredo. Here at the podcast, we are here to better understand aspects of the Filipinx-American diaspora with topics including but not limited to community history and Filipinx-American culture. And today, we have a very special guest. This woman has been writing for I don't even know how long now. She has hundreds of publications out, ranging from chapter books to journal entries, and she also has a book entitled "Letters to a Young Brown Girl" coming out September 26th. We have Barbara Jane Reyes. Barbara, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Okay, so the first question I wanted to ask you is you've been writing for a while now, but how did you get your start in writing?
I think that a lot of us grew up with storytellers in our homes, our elders, the folks who were teaching us our old folk songs, folk tales, our mythologies, right? The folks who would tell us about what life was like back in the day or what life was like in the Philippines. And they do this at the kitchen table. I grew up with my grandmother just kind of telling me stories when I was home with her, and we'd just be at the kitchen table. Or while we were gathered around, not really the fire, but like the barbecue pit, places where, our family would break bread together or we would just be drinking San Miguel beer together. So it was in places like that that I learned to ask my elders to tell us stories, tell us about the time that you did this or, whatever, tell us that story again. And so I'm glad I made it a point to listen. So when I actually started writing, when I learned that I was pretty good at writing, I realized that these were the stories that I wanted to tell or put in my poetry, because poetry was the thing that I found that I was best at. There was something about just working with these lines or these smaller units where you could just do so much in such a small amount of space. So, I've been doing that for a very long time. I didn't take an actual creative writing class until I was probably almost 30. Um, and it just blew me wide open, just that, that there was space to be able to learn technique, and that you could uh, have communities give you feedback on what were your strengths and what you could work on. And yeah, I really thrived in that kind of space. So just for as long as I know, I went from just being a hearer of stories to an asker of stories to a teller of stories.
I really love that you brought up the aspect of Filipino storytelling because that is such an innate thing that we don't really realize until we actually start like reflecting back on it, like you just did. Like you started like hearing all those stories at a very young age, and now you're at this point where you're putting out those stories, and it's like it's also pretty wild because you said that you didn't start taking like creative writing classes until like 30, and it's just like that's when it started. Is that when it really started like blowing up for you in a sense?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, prior to that, I was, writing some poems and, getting published in places like Maganda Magazine at UC Berkeley. And, locally, I was doing a lot of spoken word events in the Bay Area. And then I just kind of hit a wall. I didn't really like know what to do next with my writing. And so that one creative writing class I took, which was at a community college, it was, Berkeley City College. Yeah, I think that's when it blew up, and I was able to kind of do different things that I hadn't thought about before. And and I'd always had mentors, folks like Nick Carbo and Eileen Tabios, who were so generous and just like, what you have already, let's see more of that. Or they're going to edit an anthology, wouldn't they like to include me in it? So there was always, elders like that who were very, very encouraging. Um, but I guess I had to show them that this was something I was committed to, and yeah, and they were very like, yeah, they pretty much just opened the door and said, "Come on through." But yeah, it was after that class that I realized I can really do this, and I can do it in a multitude of ways.
Okay, so when you're writing pieces or just like any kind of writing piece or whatever, does it just come innately, or do you take time to brainstorm? Like, what's your process like when you're putting together a small or big project?
That's a good question. A multitude of ways. A lot of the time, when I used to actually journal a lot more regularly, as a good daily habit, I could be sitting in a cafe or in a bar and just be free writing, whatever. And it could be stuff that I was observing. It could have been stuff that I was overhearing people say in the streets, and whatever. And that would become my raw material. Sometimes I would find, like, oh, well, that was a really interesting thing that this person said, or that was a really interesting image that I just saw. Um, and then, I would grow something from that. I'd be able to take all that raw material and find the pieces that I wanted to work with. And that was really good for individual poems. And then at some point, and it could be when I was in grad school, where I started to think about, like, what would a bigger project look like? So these days, the ways that I like to get started is usually with questions. I have questions about things I don't know and I want to find out, and that becomes my prompt, that or my funnel or filter through which everything that I see and hear and read and consume passes through, and that's how I start trying to answer those questions. And sometimes there's just these big historical, what I think are unanswerable questions, or super general, like, why am I here as a Filipina in this place? Why am I viewed through a certain lens when I'm walking down the street or living my life? And um, yeah, and then from there, like, everything is just kind of coming through uh, that question, and that's how I'm putting it on the page. Um, and then lately, for my past three collections of poetry, I have been asking other Pinays questions, or just kind of opening my social media door, at least, and saying, like, what are the questions you folks have for me? As a Pinay, what do you want to find out from me? And I wrote my last three books that way, just answering their questions.
It almost sounds like your way of writing, especially for like those last three. It seemed like it was a huge community effort to put something like that together.
Yes, absolutely. And I really have to, thank all the Pinays who, just open themselves up with these kinds of questions. Um, I cannot take for granted how much they trusted me. You don't give something up to somebody unless you trust them. And so I had to, you know, honor them and honor the places that what they needed to know were coming from. But absolutely, I've been kind of throwing around the term kapwa poetics, right? Just kind of as an extension of family, this kind of we that we operate in all the time. That's how I have been approaching those kinds of works. And so I've been, really doing my best to just shout out these Pinays and, thank them and honor the places they're coming from.
Kampo, I am because you are. I love that phrase so much, and I've been loving it so much more now with how the community's been connected. And
Mhm.
going on that topic is doing work with the community through writing. Is that a really big theme and how you put your projects together?
I think so. I think so because I realized that I didn't gain a lot of satisfaction, or there was an endpoint to the kind of satisfaction I would get just kind of writing in my own private space, with things coming out of my head and, just kind of having this discrete space that separated me from other people. And so I feel like, if I want, it's both things, right? Like, if I want the community in my work, then I have to go to the community. There's no other way about that. I feel like as an artist, it I don't know. I don't like the idea of, my coming up with something brilliant in my own little vacuum and then bestowing it upon the community for them to thank me for it. I don't like that kind of relationship. I want the kind of relationship with community where, we're kind of in a dialogue. So yeah, and I don't know that I would call it like community activism, but it's definitely work in community, right? That we're all at the same level and we're all kind of working through this, together.
It sounds very grassroots the way that you're putting it. Like you said that it's really important to get back into community to do these kind of projects, like if it's community based or whatever.
Hmm.
Like you wouldn't be able to do, or would you be able to? Do you think you'd be able to do that kind of work if it it didn't feel grassroots?
Uh, I think you're absolutely right. I would not be able to. And I like that you use the word grassroots, right? Just here at the ground level where we're all at. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't like, yeah, I don't like the idea of just kind of, from above, kind of dictating the terms of, the terms of the work and saying like, this is my own kind of singular individual effort. That's very Western, right? And of course, we live in Western culture. But if I want to write about Filipino things or Filipino American things, then I need to honor, what is Filipino about me. And I think it goes back again to that, that where we do like live our lives always kind of with consideration to one another, always consulting one another and, kind of thinking in collective identity, right?
Most definitely. And I
Yeah,
wanted to shift back a little bit
sure.
to what you said a while ago about how Pinay poetry is like one of your biggest things. What is your personal definition of what Pinay poetry looks like?
Okay. Yeah, Pinay poetry is a lot of things. I've been teaching Pinay Lit now for 8 years, going on 9 years, I think. And I've cycled through a lot of different kinds of work. And I guess the one good definition I could come up with is the fact that Pinay poetry is just so many things, and there's no singular definition that I would want to impose upon anyone or everyone. I think that the most important element of Pinay poetry is that a Pinay has decided to speak. She's decided to commit her word to the page. She's decided to tell her own story in her own words, in her own languages, and I don't hear just mean English and Tagalog or Taglish, Ilocano, Visayan, but, what is the language of her community? Is she from Oakland? Is she from San Francisco? Is she from Chicago? Omaha? Who knows, right? What is the language of her place? And so she is doing it on her own terms. And when she decides to control her own narrative and speak out against patriarchal traditions, this is where I believe like the best of Pinay poetry is born. Yeah, and also I feel like my definition of Pinay poetry would also include recognizing our elders in the field or in the tradition of Filipinas writing. We don't have to go too far back. If we look at folks like Jessica Hagedorn, for example, who first started performing and publishing in San Francisco, or Mila Aguilar, who wrote poetry while she was a political prisoner during martial law, or Alina Mabanglo, who writes Tagalog poetry from the point of view of Filipinas, diasporic Filipinas, or folks like Shirley Ancheta and Virginia Sereno, who wrote these Pinay voices in Northern California in a time when only Filipino men were recognized for their work, right, and for their presence. And so, I feel like that kind of calling to calling to the elders, is an important part of Pinay poetry.
And it's such a strong. Well, I mean, those people you mentioned, they have, like I've read some of the work before, and their work, their voices are so strong, and it's just so like it's so powerful to see someone like that, and it's really interesting to see how different, but also how similar writing is for different Pinays throughout like different decades and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. So, just going on to your book and everything, like going back to like the whole intersectionality portion of like community and everything, I like that you bring that up, especially since you practice that heavily in your book because it's a very Bay Area esque book. There's a lot of like references and all that. That I'm not from the Bay Area, but it's
Yeah.
just like I have a lot of friends that are out there right now or have like lived there, and it's just I could tell that like this is very authentically your work.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a great compliment. Definitely, it's very local, right? It's like I'm trying to think of some of the spots that I bring up that are super Bay Area, but of course, all of it is escaping me now. But yeah, I feel like just being on a muni bus or on a BART train or something like that, which could easily translate into a subway train in another city, but there are definitely elements of it that would take place nowhere but here, or maybe it's just embedded in the language and I'm not fully conscious of it because that's just the language that I live and breathe in.
I think that's totally fine because I feel like for the reader, it helps them paint a picture of what you're trying to convey, and I feel like that's really important when it comes to writing.
Absolutely.
So one of the other topics I want to talk about is liminality. So what exactly is that, or like when you learn that word, what was the definition that was given to you?
Okay. Well, I learned the term liminality in the very first intro to Asian American studies class that I took, or it was an Asian American history class that was taught by Ron Takaki at UC Berkeley back in 1989. And we were reading his book, Strangers from a Different Shore. And he described liminality as this state of being in between, right? Just in between. It is, it means to be on the threshold, which typically means that you exit one thing, you stand at the entryway of another thing, and then you enter that other place. However, as a person coming from an immigrant community, do we ever truly exit our original cultural identities, even if we have left, quote unquote, the motherland? And, many Filipinos were never even born in the Philippines. They're from here, or they're from another place. And so, we look back at like, what does our quote unquote home culture look like, and what are the cultures that we enter when we enter into the world, right? But Professor Takaki also gave this great example of another Bay Area reference here, the Great Fire that happened in San Francisco after the earthquake. When San Francisco Chinatown burnt to the ground, um, the reputation that Chinatown had before as this kind of, place of depravity, prostitution, gambling dens, opium, whatever, the folks in that community said, let's rebuild and let's make something else. And they made it into, the community that it eventually became today, right? Quote unquote, respectable and a destination. And that was because they had nothing but just the ability to create something new, right? So that's how I learned the term liminality. And when I teach it to my students, I basically tell them, right, here we are as Filipinos or folks from many places, and we are standing at the threshold of multiple identities, living in this place of in-betweenness. But we also know that in that in-betweenness, whereas kind of the common perception of being quote unquote stuck there is like, well, you're too much of this or you're not enough of that. How many times have we had our parents tell us we're too American, we're not Filipino enough? And then we enter into the mainstream where folks who represent the mainstream tell us that we're too foreign or we're alien and we don't belong here. So rather than just kind of take it from a place of deficit, I always like to flip it around, no pun intended, and really just talk about like, how is this a place of creativity and innovation, right? we have this ability to take from our multiple places, right? And build a new identity or create new art or create a new language in that space. And we have the ability to enlarge this space, right? Um, and then we should consider, is our goal to leave our home cultures behind and to assimilate into a mainstream culture that doesn't want us, or is our goal to, to really kind of enlarge our, a space where we belong and are safe in, and you know so I guess that's my take on it. What I really loved is that, I teach this every semester, and then I did have one semester where a group of my students, just took it on and created this Pinay Liminality website, and do these workshops on Pinay Liminality, where they are talking about like the many places where our intersecting identities are like, they might be pushing up against one another, but this is how we kind of create something new from that. Does that even
It's
make sense, what I just
oh
said?
no,
Oh my God, yeah.
that makes complete sense. 'Cause, like
Yeah.
I'm trying to like process this right now, but it's like the way I'm seeing it is like it's kind of like 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out. Like you I think you hit the nail on the head when you said like you have like Filipino family that's like, oh, you're not Filipino enough, but then like you have your American side like saying, oh, you're too foreign for
Uh-huh.
us or something like that.
Yep.
And I was gonna ask how you apply it in like your life and everything, but it seems like it's really inborn, but it doesn't seem like it was really brought up until you heard the term, right?
Yeah, and I think that like, um, when when I guess when I was made aware of that term and the kind of empowerment that you know, you can experience being in that place, then it's really about, looking again at the traditional power dynamic and saying, I'm not going to have that, right? It's obviously a lot easier said than done. And then I realize, and this comes up a lot too, that I live in a place like the Bay Area where, to be liminal, to be multicultural, to be in a diverse place, does give me a certain amount of safety, to be a professor in Filipino studies or to write Filipina centric work without feeling as though I have to compromise anything. The fact that I'm here makes it possible. But what if I were somewhere else where there was nobody around me who understood where I came from? Then that feeling of empowerment that one can derive from liminality then probably isn't as easy to come by. So I hear a lot of philams from different other parts of the country, talk about the kind of privilege that we have in these, metropolitan areas like the Bay Area that are full of Filipinos.
It's very different, but at the end of the day, it's like it's such a huge process to just go about because like it's not something that really comes. It's not something that happens overnight. It's like it's still a constant thing, and I see that in your writing and how you like you're able to embody that.
Yes, I think so. And it's, and a lot of it too is just being able to get to this place where you feel comfortable writing what you want to write, how you want to write it. I did come from a MFA program in poetry where I was the only Filipina in the entire poetry program in San Francisco, which is ironic and weird. So it was like, how do I write Filipino centric work in a place where nobody gets where I'm coming from? And, not just what I want to write, but how I want to write well, it's foreign to them. So I need to, either just, be comfortable with what I'm doing and find a way to be comfortable to continue doing it. Or I give in and I do the thing that all of my colleagues are doing because it's easier than having to fight all the time. So, It's definitely, yeah, it's definitely something that is a process, and it is work. And I think that the work is rewarding.
And I'm assuming from your writing and everything, you've embraced the previous. You've been more comfortable with writing the way you feel like you should be writing and everything, right?
I think so, yeah. And I have to tell you too, the more I've been finding out that the more specific I am with my work, the more Pinay specific I feel my work is, the more readers from all kinds of other places are able to actually tap in it and find value and meaning in it for them. And that is interesting. That is not something I had anticipated would happen. I never thought other people outside of my own community would actually read the work and receive it well. And that came from my saying, I need to just write it like this, the way that I would write it for my community or for my family, right?
Isn't that so wild to hear yourself saying that? Like, did you think you were gonna be at this point where you're saying that, like in terms of writing?
No, I really didn't. And actually, like, I had a lot of people, tell me their horror stories of being not just the only Filipino, but the only brown person in their writing programs, and that it was hell trying to, trying to write stuff that was important to them and that was coming from, their own family histories or, whatever. And I've had other people say to me, oh, I hear that writing programs are really more like whiting programs, and it was disheartening. So I always kind of thought, well, crap, it sounds like I have to choose. But then I realized when I chose not to choose, and it was like, I'm just going to go and I'm just going to do this. So yeah, you're right. I never did think that I'd be in this kind of place, but here it is. So I'm excited.
Since you did mention the whole like writing thing or like how the stories of other people saying that, what kind of advice? Oh, this is the last question, by the way.
Sure. Uh-huh.
How does one truly make their writing theirs? Because you've seemed to been able to make that after like a long time, but how does someone feel like, or how does someone achieve that? How can they make their writing their own?
Well, I'll start with a couple of don'ts and then I will continue with the do's, but don't try to sound like other people, right? Don't let other people tell you how you should sound. Um, Write your own story and pay attention to your own voice. What is specific and unique about your own voice, about your own family history, right? What is the most important thing for you to write? Don't write a thing because other people are writing about something that is sexy or timely or, whatever. Just write what is most important to you. And I feel like, the more kind of heart you put into that, the better the work is going to be, because you aren't trying to sound like the next fill in the blank with somebody's name who's really hot right now. You're not trying to be that person. You are just saying, I need to work on my own stuff. I need to work on my own story. This is a tribute that I have for my mother, father, grandparents, sisters, brothers, etc. This is ours, and this is, I'm going to do it this way. And I realize, again, I always say these things, and I realize it is easier said than done. But I guess I should also say that I mean, this has been a decades long journey, right, for me. So it's not going to happen overnight, and you are going to get a lot of naysayers and people who are like, man, what is this, right? And you have to learn how to really calibrate your filters and find out what kind of criticism is valid criticism that is only helping you grow, and what kind of criticism is really just haterade that is just noise, and you need to learn how to distance yourself from it. So it takes a very long time and a lot of hard work, but I feel as though, once you really commit to it, then you will start to see the rewards of that. But yeah, you only you can write the thing that is meant for you to write. Other people will jump on a topic because it is the thing to write about, but you don't have to do that.
So essentially, just embrace the self because that's what's really most important about writing. Because you won't be able to put out the best kind of work that you're capable of if you're trying to do something that anyone else is trying or something that everyone else is trying to do, right?
I think so, right. I mean, unless it is something that is very important to you, then what is your particular take on the thing? I think we're going to see a lot of pandemic work come out soon. So, how is it specific to you? Right? We know all of the news and fake news and the data and other people's stories out there that we're seeing blasted all over social media. But what is unique about this for you, right from that place? You know. So yeah, that is what I think. And the same thing happened similarly after 9/11, right? I was in my first semester of grad school when 9/11 happened. And, I started to see people banging out all kinds of work about, 9/11 and the aftermath of, but they were writing from places that just sounded like they were just pulling from the news and from other people. And I thought, okay, but how has it affected you? How is it important to you? What about this is important to you, right? So that would always be my advice. What about this thing is the most important thing for you, that you need to say it and only you are able to?
Honestly, I really love that advice, and I need to start taking that to heart as someone that
Okay,
writes as well. Like, I feel like I'm still growing in my process too, but yeah, I really appreciate that and everything.
good,
And that
good.
being
I'm glad.
said,
Yeah.
oh wait, what were you gonna say?
No. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad I could be of help.
I'm really hoping that people will take that to heart too, because that's really important advice that a lot of people need to take, not just in writing, but just like in just life in general. It's like
Yeah,
you just got to be your authentic self and everything.
absolutely.
And that being said, I know you have a book coming out, Letters to a Young Brown Girl, coming out September 26th. Where can people find that?
Well, let's see. Letters to a Young Brown Girl is coming out in September. It is being published by BOA Editions. So it is going to be available on their website. I believe it's already up now, BOA, BOA Editions com, I think. Find it at your local independent bookstore. Bookshop.org is a good place to go. Find it there. And yeah, support the small businesses. It is on Amazon. If you absolutely must be buying from Amazon, but I am a strong supporter of independent publishing. Who are the folks who have supported me throughout my publishing career, and I am a strong supporter of independent and community bookstores. So locally, folks like Eastwind Books, which is an Asian American APIA bookstore in Berkeley, Archipelago Bookstore in San Francisco, and on their websites, it will be available there. And of course,
Personally,
City
I'm gonna
Lights Books, which is like my favorite bookstore in the whole universe in San Francisco, it will be available there as well.
personally, I'm gonna get mine from Archipelago. Shout out to Lily if you're listening to this.
Nice. Hi, Lily. Thank you.
And where can everyone else find your work as well?
Well, my website is barbarajanereyes.com. I try my best to put up links to my works that are published in online venues. Um, I'm a little behind right now. And then I'm on social media too. So if you find me there every once in a while, I'll be posting up, places where my work is being featured. Yeah.
And am I okay? What was your IG again?
Oh, let's see, B Jane PR, BJANEPR.
Make sure to follow up with Barbara on all her social media platforms and all her websites, and make sure to get her book when it comes out. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thanks
Thanks.
so much.